The Ghost Army, how artists fooled Hitler with inflatable tanks, the most elaborate con job in military history. Picture this. It's June 1944, and German reconnaissance planes circle overhead, photographing what appears to be a massive Allied tank division preparing for attack. Artillery units gleam in the French countryside. Supply depots bustle with activity. Radio chatter fills the airwaves with encrypted military communications. There's only one problem. None of it is real. The tanks are made of rubber. The artillery pieces are inflatable props. The bustling soldiers are mannequins positioned by men who, just months earlier, were designing window displays for department stores and painting landscapes in Greenwich Village studios. Welcome to the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, better known as the Ghost Army, perhaps the most audacious military deception unit ever assembled, and certainly the only one where recruitment required a portfolio review. When your army needs more Picasso, less Patton. In 1944, while most military units were built from soldiers trained in combat, the U.S. Army did something extraordinary. They drafted an army of artists. Not just any artists, the cream of America's creative class. Fashion designers from 7th Avenue, sound engineers from radio studios, set designers from Hollywood, commercial artists who made advertisements sing, fine artists who'd studied at the most prestigious institutions in America. Among them was Bill Blass, who would later become one of fashion's most celebrated designers. Ellsworth Kelly, the future abstract expressionist master. Art Kane, who would photograph some of the most iconic images in jazz history. These men could wield a paintbrush with the precision most soldiers reserved for their rifles, and the Pentagon had a very specific use for that talent: fooling the Third Reich. The architect of this theatrical warfare was a British officer named Colonel Dudley Clark, who had pioneered deception tactics in North Africa. But it was the Americans who took his concepts and inflated them, quite literally, to industrial scale. The question wasn't whether artists could contribute to the war effort. It was whether illusion could be weaponized as effectively as a Sherman tank. The answer would help change the course of World War II. Rubber tanks and sonic deceptions, the arsenal of illusion. The Ghost Army's toolkit read like a surrealist's fever dream, crossed with a theatrical production company's inventory. At the heart of their operation were inflatable tanks, artillery pieces, and even entire airplanes, all constructed from rubber and canvas, held aloft by air compressors. A four-man crew could erect a 40-ton Sherman tank replica in 15 minutes. From 500 feet in the air, the typical altitude for reconnaissance aircraft, these rubber phantoms were indistinguishable from the real thing. But visual deception was only the opening act. The Ghost Army deployed sonic warfare that would have made science fiction writers jealous. Using massive speakers mounted on half-tracks, they broadcast pre-recorded sounds of tank battalions, troop movements, and construction activity. These weren't simple recordings. They were meticulously crafted audio landscapes mixed and mastered by professional sound engineers who understood acoustics like composers understand music. The sounds could be heard up to 15 miles away, painting an auditory picture of military might where none existed. Then came the radio games. The Signal Company Special created entirely fictional military networks, broadcasting bogus communications in proper military code and protocol. They mimicked the radio signatures of real units, creating the electromagnetic footprint of entire divisions. German radio intelligence operators, listening intently to Allied communications, heard what sounded like multiple Army corps maneuvering across France, when in reality, they were tracking a few hundred men with transmitters. And because no deception is complete without the human element, Ghost Army soldiers would don the patches and insignia of the units they were impersonating, then venture into local towns. They'd frequent bars and cafes, loudly discussing fictional troop movements and operations, knowing that enemy spies and informants were always listening. They were method actors in a play where the critics were Nazi intelligence officers, and a bad review meant Allied soldiers would die. Operation Viersen, the performance of a lifetime. By March 1945, the Ghost Army had executed over 20 deception operations, but none would be as audacious or as consequential as Operation Viersen. The real U.S. Ninth Army was preparing to cross the Rhine River, the last major natural barrier before the German heartland. It was a moment when the entire German military machine would be watching, ready to mass forces at any perceived crossing point. The Ghost Army's mission: make the Germans believe the main crossing would happen at a completely different location. In the frozen fields near Viersen, fewer than 1,000 Ghost Army soldiers created the illusion of 2 full combat divisions, over 30,000 men, preparing for a massive river assault. They erected hundreds of inflatable tanks in precise military formations. They created fake supply dumps, complete with dummy crates and equipment that looked perfect from aerial reconnaissance. Their sound trucks played continuous recordings of construction activity, bridges being assembled, equipment being moved, engineers at work. The radio operators broadcast a symphony of fake communications, creating the electromagnetic signature of massive troop concentrations. Meanwhile, real units were being disguised to look depleted, withdrawn, or redeploying elsewhere. It was military prestidigitation on an unprecedented scale, a magic trick where misdirection could save thousands of lives. For 3 days and nights, the Ghost Army performed. German aerial reconnaissance photographed their installations. Enemy artillery began targeting their phantom positions. Most importantly, German military intelligence shifted their assessment of where the main attack would come, repositing troops and armor to defend against an assault that would never materialize. When the real Ninth Army crossed the Rhine miles away from the Ghost Army's fake concentration, they met lighter resistance than anticipated. The Germans had been looking the wrong way. The curtain dropped on the Ghost Army's performance, but by then, Allied forces were across the river and driving into Germany's industrial heart. Military analysts later estimated the deception saved hundreds, possibly thousands of Allied lives. The artists who came home. What makes the Ghost Army story so remarkable isn't just the audacity of the deception or its battlefield success. It's what happened when these men came home. They returned to America under strict orders never to discuss their wartime service. The Ghost Army remained classified for decades, so they went back to their easels, their design studios, their cameras, and their drawing boards, carrying secrets they couldn't share. Bill Blass built a fashion empire. Ellsworth Kelly created abstract masterpieces that hang in the world's greatest museums. Art Kane photographed A Great Day in Harlem, one of the most famous photographs in jazz history. Dozens of others became celebrated artists, designers, architects, and teachers, shaping American visual culture in the post-war decades. They had learned something profound on the battlefields of Europe: that perception is reality, that what people believe they see is as powerful as what actually exists, and that creativity can be as potent a weapon as firepower. They'd turned art into ammunition and illusion into strategy, proving that sometimes the pen or the paintbrush truly is mightier than the sword. The last deception, the Ghost Army's final irony, is perhaps the most fitting. For decades, their story remained hidden, classified, almost as invisible as the phantom armies they created. When the program was finally declassified in the 1990s, many veterans were elderly or had passed away, never receiving recognition for their service. They'd performed the ultimate deception, making the world believe they'd done nothing extraordinary at all. Today, the Ghost Army's legacy challenges our understanding of warfare itself. In an age of drone strikes and cyber warfare, their story reminds us that war has always been as much about psychology and perception as about tanks and bullets. They proved that creativity, ingenuity, and theatrical audacity could achieve what brute force alone could not. Somewhere in the fields of France and Germany, the ghosts of those rubber tanks and canvas artillery pieces still stand guard over a simple truth: the greatest weapon isn't always the one that destroys. Sometimes it's the one that deceives, misdirects, and makes the enemy defeat themselves by attacking shadows, while the real blow comes from where they're not looking. The Ghost Army didn't just fool Hitler. They rewrote the rules of warfare itself, armed with nothing more dangerous than imagination, artistry, and inflatable rubber. And that might be the most remarkable con job in military history.